Afternoon, everyone. Here I am again with another video to help you to liberate your mind. And today I want to talk about how we create our reality. So everyone has preferences on how they process and make sense of the world, right? We take all the information in through our five senses, but we have preferences about how we then interpret and make sense of and communicate what we've created, right? So we call this like our map of the world. Most of the population are very visual people, and you can tell this by the kind of language that they use. It might be that they say, "I see what you mean," or, look. They will start their sentences with "look." What I'm trying to say to you is this: the way I see it, and they carry on like that. And then there'll be obviously the audio and self-talk and everything else, and the kinesthetic, the feelings. So the other way you can tell is the way that people are when they do their eye patterns. And essentially, if someone is very visual and you ask them a question, they start looking up here or up here, they go visual first, right? Now, you guys don't really need to know that too much unless you're being a therapist or a practitioner. So what I want to do is give you some information that will help you. And that is how you create your reality can actually having an understanding about the way you do that and how you can change some of the mechanics of that. Because a lot of the time, if we're anxious people or have anxious states or depressive states or whatever it might be, you will be creating the feeling, which is always the last part of that pattern, by how you're representing your thoughts, right? So thoughts, how are you doing it? Are you making pictures? And the way you make those pictures will vary depending on if you like something, or you're thinking about something that brings you pleasure, or something that brings you pain, or something that makes you feel afraid. And it's important for you to start to consciously realize how you're doing that, because actually by changing what we would call sub-modalities of those representations that you're creating in your mind will determine how you feel about them. So let's talk a bit about that. So if we talk about the modalities being the fact that it's something you either see, you hear, you feel, you smell, you taste, or you happen to be thinking in your brain, right? Like a audio, digital, the talk, right? Then the building blocks of that, or the sub-modalities of those, are going to be, for example, let's take seeing. There will be, how bright is it? Is it in color? Is it black and white? Is it close? Is it far away? Is it big? Is it small? These are the sub-modalities of the modality of seeing, right? So it would be interesting for you to play with the sub-modalities of some of the images that you create in your mind. Now, I use this a lot when I've got a client in front of me that says, "Oh, I'm afraid of something," like I'm afraid of dogs or whatever it might be. And I will notice, I will say, "So when you think about that, what happens?" And then they will instantly usually go up and they'll start seeing. And you can tell if it's past or something they're creating by what they're doing with the eye patterns. The point is, there's always an image that they bring up, either a memory that might be moving and is a actual representation of what's going on there, or it could be that they're creating an image that hasn't even happened yet, but it's scaring them to death. So by changing the sub-modalities of those images, they will feel differently about them, because when you make changes, the meaning of that image changes. So I will say to them, what happens if it's moving, freeze that, make it still. Notice the difference. And they will say, "Oh yeah, that does feel a bit different now, because it doesn't feel like it's alive, it's just a still image." That's right, it does. What happens if we shrink it to the size of a postage stamp? Well, that feels a lot more insignificant now. It does, doesn't it? What happens if we move that now so it's down there, lower to the ground? So you're up here looking down at that. Oh, that's much better, because I feel taller and bigger than that dog now, Or what happens if we put that behind you now? So it's even like behind them, as in their past, potentially, or over to the left. So there are lots of things you can do with that. You can make it black and white, take the color out of it. You can make it so thin that it's like tracing paper and you can see through that now. And a lot of the language, again, will help in terms of actually being a therapist. But what we're talking about here is, how do you create those representations, those movies in your mind? And notice what happens when you make changes to those images, those movies. What happens if you change the sound? So we can also do this on some of the voices or the thoughts that we get, right? We tend to have lots of different ego states or modes that we go into. And you will notice that when you're starting to panic, a very specific kind of ego state or inner monologue kicks in a lot of the time. And by changing the sub-modalities of that voice, those thoughts, the feelings and the meaning will change. So what you can do again is you could change the speed of the voice. You could change the words. You could change the pitch. You could change the rhythm. You could change whether it's facing you or away from you. You could actually move it right over there somewhere so it's in the distance. And the more changes you make to how that mechanism comes in, those changes tend to stick, right? Because the brain is in a learning state when you're making those changes, and then it saves it that way unless you make other changes to that. You can, in fact, ask your body to actually release that fully. If you take it a step further, you could close your eyes and almost have a conversation with that part and say, thank you for all your help. Because here's the other thing we have to remember. Everything our brain and body does has a positive intention. So if that voice is coming to rush in, to you, it seems like it's just there and freaking you out. But actually, it's serving a purpose, which is it's trying to protect you. However, it's trying to protect you most of the time based on who you were when it was created, which will usually be when you're a kid. So it's no longer necessary or helpful to have that in. The metaphor I like to use is, maybe once upon a time it was a life jacket that held you above the water. Now it's holding you below the water, and it's now actually the very thing that's making you freak out and go into panic mode. So if that voice was no longer kicking in and trying to say the same things it normally says, would that be of benefit to you? Would that be easier? Yes, it would. Okay, so let's make some positive changes. Are you ready to change that now? And if the answer is yes, we'll make all those changes. And the more changes we make to that, the better they feel, because it suddenly feels different. It sounds different. It changes the meaning. And then you can close your eyes and have that conversation. Thank you for all your help over the years. I don't need this anymore. So I'm choosing to release this pattern now. You're speaking to your body. You're speaking to your unconscious mind. And when you do that, and then give it permission to make those changes, and you can sit there just breathing deeply with your eyes closed to allow it to process, there's a very good chance that that will never come back. And you can do that with images, you can do it with movies, you can do it with sounds, you can do it with all kinds of things that you're creating internally. And by making those positive changes, you will be less triggered. You will feel more positive, more calm, more relaxed. And once those sort of things are gone, you can think more clearly, right? You've got more space. You can have more creativity coming up because your mind is more present, all right? So make these changes, play with these ideas, and notice how much better you feel. So I hope that's been helpful. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll speak to you again soon.